Hey guys, I have been promising you a video talking about foundation after 40. I have a lot of tips and tricks that have helped me be able to feel like my face still looks pretty smooth and fresh and younger than I would have expected at age 44, I guess. So if you are interested in learning a little bit about my routine, I hope that some of it will work for you too. Please keep watching. Okay, so here I am with fresh face, getting ready to go over some of the steps that help me feel like my foundation looks a lot nicer than if I had not done them. So the first step that I do and that I recommend, and some people are really scared of this step, is actually dermaplaning. With dermaplaning, you're taking one of these types of razors and just essentially dry, let's call it scraping instead of shaving, since shaving seems to be such a scary term for some people when it comes to our face. But dry scraping the dead skin cells and actually the peach fuzz type hair off of my skin. I find that these types of razors don't take off those dark bristly hairs that we love so much, but it is a great tool to get all of that peach fuzz off. Once that peach fuzz is gone, your foundation will lay a lot smoother on your skin, especially in areas back here, things that we don't see when we're looking straight on that others see, or I find in pictures or something like that, that makes me realize how important this step is to not skip. So it's super simple and it's exactly what you would expect, and it's certainly not the same caliber if you had done it professionally, but it is plenty to help your skin look nice and smooth underneath your foundation. So I've already done it today, but I'm just going to show you a little bit of exactly what I do, especially in these kinds of areas. So I will take this dermaplaner and just scrape down all the way to my brow, careful to avoid my brow. And it helps to get a lot of that skin cell, and I don't know if you can see it, the little bit of peach fuzz that comes off on here. So I essentially just go over my entire face and dermaplane to help get off that peach fuzz. I don't know if you can hear that kind of scraping noise. And definitely there are dry skin cells and peach fuzz that are coming off on this tool. So like I said, I've already done it today. There's a couple different ones. This one is my favorite. I'll leave it in the comments below. But there are tinier ones. You can find these at Sally's. You can find them at your CVS, whatever type of place that sells beauty related products, you can find these. Next step, once I have that dermaplaning complete, and I don't want to do that step before the second step, because I don't want to be removing my skincare. But second step is super important. It's your skincare. At 44, it took me until last year to start understanding and accepting the fact that I needed to be doing skincare underneath my foundation. And I'll be honest, the biggest reason I resisted as long as I did was actually because I couldn't find skincare that didn't eat away at my makeup that I put on top of it all day long. So once you do find that though, once you find one that makes you feel as though it doesn't harm the look of your makeup, make sure that you're using that both night and day. I see a huge difference when I didn't do my nighttime skincare in my makeup the next day. And I know that a big part of that is that moisture that I'm missing from my nighttime routine. So what I use are Mary Kay line, the Time Wise Repair, and the first step every day that I do is the Voluferm Advanced Lifting Serum. What I have to say about this though, and I recognize this immediately, is that if I use more than the one pump that comes out automatically, I'm gonna be a grease slick in the entire day. So it's important that you don't overdo it with your skincare either. Now at nighttime, do I do a lot extra? Yes, I make sure that I'm really hydrated at night. But for this one, again, it's just one pump, and then I put that between my fingertips and put it all over my face. And again, I try to use motions that are sweeping away. You actually can push some of that extra fluid out of your face by pushing out and away. So out and away. The next step that I use in my skincare routine is the Mary Kay Age Minimized 3D moisturizer. So this moisturizer is not part of the repair line, but the reason I use this one instead, and you may also be having this problem, is that this one does not contain a real heavy sunscreen. The sunscreens, as much as I know I need to be using them, the sunscreens in the heavier ones cause my makeup to almost even pill on my face. So I'm careful to use a moisturizer that I know isn't that problem. So if you are finding things that are pilling, it might actually be your moisturizer, and you might want to consider changing to one that works better underneath of makeup. So again, I'm not using a substantial amount, putting it between my fingers, and the same type of motion. I'm just slowly working that in and upwards and outwards motion. What I do that's different than the actual line and what it calls for, I don't use the under eye cream during the day. So the reason for that is I find that it makes my eyelid crease pretty significantly underneath. So instead of using a dedicated eye cream, I actually just take my moisturizer on my fingers, what's left, and smooth it into that area. Okay, so now we're to the good stuff. Let's talk about a couple things first, some things that I've learned over the years. It took me a long time to find foundations that I actually truly liked. So there were different things that I'm looking for. Number one, I like coverage. I'm a full coverage kind of girl. So I like one that gives me enough coverage but doesn't look super heavy and cakey, obviously. There are a million different reasons though why the foundation you're using might look cakey or heavy. Or you might be having issues related to it that have nothing to do with either your skin or that foundation itself. So a couple tips that I'll give you is don't give up on your foundation the first time you try it. Try it with a primer. Try it without a primer. Try it with a different primer. Be careful because some primers are oil-based and some makeups are water-based, or foundations are water-based. So if you take an oil and a water, what happens? They're gonna separate. So be careful when you're combining products, especially primers and foundations, and make sure that you try different foundations and primers together, or go without a primer. I hadn't been a primer user for a long time. I happened to find one that I like recently, and it has really given me a ton of longevity with my foundation. So I am using it regularly. But that being said, I have lots of foundations that work very well without a primer. Second thing is, as far as the tool that you're applying it with. So I have several different options and I use different things based on which foundation I'm using, because some foundations look really great with a brush. Some foundations look terrible with a brush. It just smooths or streaks away. Same thing with a sponge. I have foundations that are great with a sponge. I have some that are terrible. I even bought the new Tati Beauty, it's called the Blendiful. It looks like this. This is awesome for a lot of the foundations that I use, but it's not awesome for my favorite foundation at the moment. So you can see that there's a lot of different methods, combining different primers, using different tools to put it on, that can really take that foundation you thought you disliked and make it something that you really do like. So I talked to you a little bit about this Tati blender, whatever they want to call it. I guess they call it a sponge, but it basically has a material type covering to it. And it is supposed to be something that you use for multiple different things. So you can use it for your foundation, turn it to another corner, use it for contouring, use it for your blush. I'm a fan of this for foundation only and for powder. The issue is that I constantly forget that I used it for powder and then go back in and stick it in my foundation. And you never want to put powder coated foundation on your face. That one thing I'm trying to avoid, looking cakey, is exactly what's going to be a product of putting foundation coated in powder directly onto your face. Another tool that I use is, and again, depending on the actual foundation that I'm using, is a dense, flat brush. So you can see that this one is super dense and it is flat topped essentially. So I'm able to use this one with my thicker foundation. I was a huge Beauty Blender fan for a long time, but the fact is I don't like paying $20 every time I want to replace my sponge or my sponge is starting to look gross. And I would aggressively wash that thing until it started to fall apart in my hands. So I went out and started looking for something that was a little less expensive but worked as well as the Beauty Blender. and came across these ones. These ones are made by June & Co. and they're a microfiber sponge. And the difference between them and the Beauty Blender is actually, number one, the price. They're significantly less expensive. But two, it almost has a velvety surface to it. So it picks up less product, but it leaves a very polished look almost on your face because of this velvety surface. So this one is my favorite. The most important thing, if you use a beauty blender or any type of sponge like this, they are meant to be wet and then wrung all the way out. So this one actually starts a little smaller. I'll show it to you next to a brand new one. But this one is already wet and wrung out in the sink. And you can see the difference between these two. So this one's brand new out of the package. This one was already wet and wrung out. And as I squeeze it now, I'm not getting any more water out of it. So it's truly just meant to be damp. If you're using it any more than damp or from dry, you're not gonna get the same look as if it was properly done. And this is the way that it's meant to be done. Okay, so let's talk about primers. Primers have been something that I have not been a huge fan of for a very long time, mostly because I was really struggling with my pores, and I found that the more I was trying to pile on in order to cover my pores, the worse my pores were getting. So essentially I'm filling the holes of my pores to cover that surface for putting makeup on, but the problem is I am holding those pores blown open because I have all of that product sitting in it in order to make that smooth surface. So I tried to avoid primers for as long as I could, working on my pores themselves by doing an excellent skincare routine day and night. I finally got my pores to shrink down to a really good place to where I don't feel like the reason I want to wear a primer is only for the sake of filling my pores. Now my goal in wearing primer is truly for lengthening the amount of time that my foundation lasts. And the one that I'm about to show you is one that truly has made a significant difference in how long my makeup lasts during the day. So this one is made by Farsali. It's Farsali Liquid Glass. And not to be an Instagram, what would we consider that? An Instagram baddie? How this was a popular one on Instagram for some time. But truly the best way I have found to apply it is actually to drip it across my forehead and then both cheeks. And then I go in and I simply spread it around, and you'll notice that as you're doing that, it's starting to get tacky. Now by tacky, I don't mean that my hand is gonna stick to my face completely. It's not sticky. It's just tacky enough that once you lay your foundation down, it's gonna help it grip to your skin a little bit better and last longer throughout the day. It also helps as you're putting the other makeup on top for it not to just slide around the foundation, slide around on your face. It's now stuck in place. So you'll see if I can get it to do it, that there's enough tackiness that you can see kind of as my hand is coming off my face that it sticks slightly. So again, I don't need it for filling my pores necessarily. There's a little bit right around my nose here that I like to go in with a pore filling primer, but just a tiny bit, because I find that the pore filling primers really thicken everything up, and that's not what I'm looking for. The older I get, the thinner what I have on my face I'm trying to make. Even though I want that full coverage look, I don't want a ton of stuff on my face for that to happen. So this pore filling primer is actually by Mary Kay, and I take the tiniest bit, I can't even see it on my fingers right now, and just press it this way into my face, in just that area that I said is the only place that I really have pores, and that's here by my nose, a tiny bit at my chin, and a little bit here between my brows. Okay, so let's talk about the foundation application itself. Because of the foundation that I'm using today, I'm actually going to use that June & Co. sponge. It is one that is a little more liquid-like in consistency. So the more liquid the consistency, I go with a sponge. The thicker the consistency, I go with a brush. If you want to try that Tati Blendiful, that's good for either. You just have to work with the drier consistency foundations a little bit more with that one. So for today, because I'm using this foundation, this is the Mary Kay Time Wise Luminous 3D foundation. I am a big fan of the matte, but the Luminous, I was surprised, did not make me nearly as greasy as I anticipated it would. So this is one that's on my list right now as one of my favorites. A couple other favorites that I have are the Smashbox one that I'll put a note below. It's a very full coverage foundation and it's super thick. Definitely has to be applied with a brush. I also really like the EX1 Invisiwear line. This is really inexpensive. I've only found it online, but it is excellent. It has great staying power. And then drugstore brands, the Wet n Wild Photo Focus Foundation, also a good option. I do notice that this one I will get a little greasier in my T-zone throughout the day, so I do some extra steps in order to make that one work. But the one I'm going to use today, no extra steps. This one really sits well with my Farsali primer and goes on excellent with a sponge. So there are a lot of different ways that people do this. Some people apply it to the sponge. Some people put it on a palette and then dip their sponge in it. I don't like to do either of those. I feel like if I apply anything directly to any of the sponges, I'm losing a lot of product that way. So I always take it and put it on my fingertip, and then I swipe it into a few spots on my face. This one is fine for me to swipe my spots onto my entire face and then go in and start blending. But some of my other foundations, for instance, that Smashbox one that has a drier consistency, I would never do that because by the time I get to the other side of my face, it's going to be hard to blend. So you just have to be careful if you put down a lot of your spots of foundation first, that it's not a formula that dries fast or you're going to have a lot of trouble blending that in. So a little bit on my finger, and I'm just going to go in. And start with that much. Okay, so I'm going to take the back flat side of this sponge and I'm going to start by pulling it away to the outside of my face. As I'm pulling it, I'm going to pounce a little bit just to create that coverage. So where you're getting the fuller coverage from is not from swiping, it's from spreading it around but then pouncing over top of that area to get the coverage that you're looking for. So I start with pulling it away because this is the area that, yay, I have no wrinkles or issues with yet because there's not a lot of movement in this part of my face. So I'm okay if the coverage is a little bit thicker out here to cover things up, but in here where I have movement, lines, that kind of thing, I want it to be thinner than out here. So I always start on the outside with the most product, and then what's left is what I'm using here in the center of my face. So one of the things you want to always remember to do, this is like violation number one with foundation, is not doing anything to pull it down onto your neck or to at least go across the top of your ears and get that area that you can see kind of behind here that's going to show up. So make sure that after you have it everywhere you want it on your face, and again, that's the beauty of something like this, is that that little bit of moisture in there helps to spread it out more. So you don't want to apply foundation directly to your neck, but you want to drag it down so it kind of diffuses that color so that there's not a huge transition between the two. So make sure again that you hit your ears area, the area of your ears a little bit, and everywhere on your neck that's going to be visible, just kind of drag that out. And that's it. So Sadly, I cannot match my foundation color to the bright red neck that I get whenever I get a little bit nervous. So I'm working on that. Not working on matching my foundation to my nerves, but working on quelling my nerves so that my chest doesn't get bright red every time I try to talk to you guys. Okay, so the next step in my foundation routine, even though this isn't a foundation step, is my concealer. So my concealer I use to both highlight and conceal. I like to apply it directly from the tube to my face, but we all have seen a million different YouTube videos where we see these 20-year-olds that are creating this giant triangle on their face and doing all of this artwork. It is not necessary, and actually it's going to work against you if you're worried about it settling into fine lines and wrinkles. Think about it. If I take a whole coating triangle size, where am I going to blend that to? It's going to have to blend out to a much bigger space than just that area where you started. So I like to use a smaller amount and then blend it out to that triangle shape, but don't paint on that triangle shape or you're going to end up with entirely too much product and you're going to get a lot of creasing underneath your eyes. So I start by just applying, by the way, it should be, I go a little bit lighter than some people might be comfortable with, but it should be 1 to 2 shades lighter than your foundation color. So I take about this much and just spread it into that area, and then also give myself a little highlight area here, straight down the center of my nose. I hit a spot on my chin, a little bit on this back corner because it helps to bring my jawline out and kind of sharpen that for me. And then anywhere that I have blemishes that I want to cover. So who lied to us and told us that we only got acne when we were young? Because that's ridiculous. I still get hormonal breakouts, and right now I have a couple on my chin that I'm going to work to cover too. So I'm going to put all this on and then blend it back with that same sponge that we put our foundation on with. Oh, there's my silly makeup face. Trying not to do this. But apparently my brain is not going to allow me to put on makeup without it because I've been doing it that way forever. So if you see me making ridiculous faces that, by the way, don't change anything about the application, I apologize. I'm not trying to show you my tonsils. I'm just trying to get it worked in the way I've been used to working it in for as long as I have outside of being in front of a camera. So you can see that even though it was a lot lighter when I first put it on, it blends in well because I didn't put a ton of it on that I have to worry about blending out. So I'm just over and over, just kind of pressing in, and the pressure that you use is up to you, but especially when I'm in areas like around my nose here or at my chin where I know that I get some extra makeup, I give it some significant pressure so that it picks up any additional product that doesn't need to be laying there. Okay, so the next step that I do, and I find that this is a super important step if your goal is to stop it from settling into the spots where we are starting to get fine lines and wrinkles. I take something like this, and it's simply, I mean, you can take anything, but you want something that does have that kind of to a point tip to it because you want to get into some areas that are kind of smaller to get into. So what I do after my foundation, after my concealer, but before I put on my setting powder, that's extremely important. By definition, that setting powder is going to set in place everything you have on your face. So if you already have foundation settling into your lines, that powder is going to set it there all day and make it very difficult to work out. So I take a brush like this and I essentially go into all of those areas that I know gather foundation throughout the day, and I kind of swipe it away. So you can see here in the crease of my nose that I am just kind of working it out because extra product will lay there. Same thing here, anywhere I have movement. So my marionette lines. So all day, every time I do this, it's creasing and then opening, creasing, and then opening. So I want as little product in that area as I can manage, but still have the color be consistent across my face. So I take that same brush and I just smooth down those areas. Another difficult spot for me for whatever reason, because I don't know what movement happens here, but is right here on both sides. And then with warm fingers, and by the way, clean hands, please always make sure that you start your makeup by washing your hands. After I have everything on, I will tap in those same areas again to make sure that there is no creasing before I set my foundation with powder. I know this might seem like silly steps, but I promise you, when it comes to everything settling into your fine lines and wrinkles, you'll thank me. Makes a huge, huge difference. But again, before powder. Okay, so the next step to having a flawless base is your setting powder. Setting powder is actually pretty important for at least a couple areas on our face the older we get. But it's also extremely important that the setting powder you choose is the correct kind of setting powder for your skin type. Especially the older we get, you need to make sure it's a super finely milled setting powder. If it's not, you're definitely going to end up with creasing and cakiness, especially under your eyes. So the one I'm using today is the Mary Kay setting powder. It's translucent. That's the second important piece. You don't want to be applying color in this step. So translucent powders are your absolute go-to because they're going to work for under your eyes and anywhere else that you want to make sure you set. For me, that's essentially my T-zone. So my T-zone is across here, straight down my face. I get oily only in those areas, so I want to make sure that I set my foundation with a good setting powder after I have all of my kinks worked out. So important step for this is that after you put it on your brush, now I use the same smaller brush on my entire face just because it's easier. I don't want to waste my time switching brushes for the same product. But the important part for under your eyes is that you really tap everything off. When you think you've tapped it all off, tap it again. I think you can probably see the dust of how fine this setting powder is. And then I take and I lightly swipe and press over my entire eye area. That's going to keep all of that from creasing throughout the day. Second areas that I hit, and I actually don't tap it off. I make sure I do have product now. While I'm putting the rest of my makeup on, I'm going to put it on heavy in those areas that I know do crease and do get oily. And then we're going to come back when we're done and we're going to brush that off. And then for the rest of my face, the areas that don't crease, not under my eyes, the rest of my face, I do like to put a little sheen on with my setting powder just because I feel like it helps when I put on my bronzer and when I put on my blush so that they don't look patchy at all. I want to be able to evenly glide across and not have any of that foundation still be tacky at all so that my blush sticks directly to it in one spot or my bronzer has a stripe over here. I want to make sure that it's going to be smooth when it goes on over top. So I essentially just kind of dust the rest of my face with that same exact setting powder. Okay, so now that all the powder's on and I have everything set, I just want to zoom you in a little bit and show you exactly what it is or how it lays. So hopefully you can see. I don't look cakey. I don't have everything settling into my lines. I realize I haven't been doing much yet, but all of that helps to set everything in place before we go on to the next steps. Okay, so Even though this doesn't have to do with foundation, I thought I'd give you a little bit of bonus so you can see how my face changes when I do a couple things. So the foundation and then your powder, and my next step is going to be my contouring. I contour with a bronzer. This is the Marc Jacobs Tantastic. It's considered a bronzer, but I think that the color is perfect for contouring with. When you contour, you don't want to contour with something that's super warm. You want to use something that has a cooler tone to it, because what you're actually trying to mimic is a shadow. So if you get all of this to kind of drop back, it helps your face to look a little thinner. It helps your jawline to be a little more pronounced if we shade out everything underneath. It helps our double chin to disappear a little bit. So what I do first is I take a smaller brush like this. This is just a Luxie brush, and I'll swirl it around in my bronzer. But as you can see, it's a cooler tone bronzer. In order to find where you want to contour, the first thing you're gonna do is make a kissy face. So when I make my kissy face, I'm going to place this line actually closer to the top of that hollow. If I place it closer to the top of the hollow, it's gonna raise my cheekbones. It's not technically gonna raise my cheekbones. It's gonna make everybody else think I have higher cheekbones. But if I place it lower, it's not doing that. It's actually doing the opposite. It's making the high point lower on our face. And what we're actually going for here is raised cheekbones. So I'm gonna take it on my smaller brush first. I'm gonna make that kissy face to find where, and again, on the top side of that hollow is where I'm gonna go. So I'm going, by the way, all the way back to my hairline, but not past the center of what I would consider the apple of my cheek. You want to be careful how forward you bring this, because it's going to start to look odd if you're taking areas that are supposed to be shadowed and putting them at the high points essentially on your face when somebody's looking directly at you. Okay, so I have some cheekbones now. I wasn't blessed with them naturally by any means. So once I get this part done, then I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna go around the perimeter of my face. And pro tip for us old ladies who don't like to go to the hair salon and don't like to use the box stuff every 2 weeks to keep our roots from looking gray, it helps to cover them up a little bit. So I go around the outside perimeter, and I'm essentially just doing the same thing I did when I put it in the hollows of my cheeks, and I'm creating a shadow. I'm a big forehead girl, so that's why I go around the very top here to kind of take my 5 head back down to your standard forehead. Not gonna lie, working on those roots a little bit while I'm here. Last place I'm gonna go is underneath my chin. Make sure that when you're under here, you are not going out over the edge onto the top side of your jawline, because we want this to be lighter so that it looks like a sharper jawline. So you can see me start to take shape a little bit. So then the next thing I do is, and I still consider this another bronzer brush or contour brush, I just take one that's a little bit bigger and I kind of go back over everything to diffuse it a little bit so it's not so sharp and harsh. The nice thing is with that powder on the surface, everything blends well once you go back in. Now, depending on what I'm wearing, sometimes I'll take my bronzer and come all the way down so that there's no transition that anybody can notice or that anybody will tell me they notice. So with blush, you want to make sure that we're not doing the old middle school bright, right in the cheek clown type blush. And I actually do what's considered a halo with it too, that I'll show you, that kind of helps everything meld together. But I just use, this is actually a cheap Amazon brush. It's an artistry brush. I don't even know that I could find these anymore, but it's a little softer. It's not super dense. It doesn't have a flat top. And I dust it into my blush and then knock off the excess. And then I don't want to come here underneath my eye. I want to make sure that I'm staying on the outside top of the apple of my cheek. So I'm basically just causing a little flush in that area. So my contour is here, my blush is the second line. And then if I used highlighter, which I don't, that would be the third. So I'm just diffusing that into that contour line, but I don't want the blush to be down in that contour valley. I want the blush to stay up here on the top corner of the apple of my cheek to help keep things this way and not drag everything that way. I don't go back into the blush, but then I do take what's left on the brush and just lightly dust there. Doesn't make a big difference, but it does somehow marry everything together so that it doesn't look like that pink or whatever color you use is standing way out. I'm gonna put on the rest of my face makeup off camera for this video, and I will be right back. Never realized I can't snap with my left hand. Okay, so I have the rest of my makeup on and just wanted to come back and talk to you guys a little bit about what we talked about. So again, the big things are making sure that we're not piling makeup into the places that we are having problems with. So you don't want to add to the issue by having a ton of product on top of our wrinkles or fine lines or however you want to call them. So that's the biggest thing. Making sure that you have a finely milled powder is huge. You don't want to be placing a heavy powder under your eyes, especially, because that's going to definitely end up looking cakey or creasy or crepey by the end of the night. And lastly, you just want to be sure that everything is well diffused. If you're using contouring, bronzer, blush, that you go back over to kind of blend everything together. Use my tip to kind of lay it down with a smaller brush first and then go back in with a fluffier brush to kind of diffuse it out. But other than that, those are my biggest tips for our more mature skin. I'm happy in my skin right now. So I've found some ways, fine-tuned it for myself. You will definitely have to fine-tune it for you too, but best of luck. I think it only gets better from here. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, as always, like it below. Please, please, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.